get started, first wanted to mention Joe Metler. You met him downstairs probably. He's my technician. And then I got Jace Hyman and Ethan Muse are a couple of my graduate students right now. And Ethan especially, I used some of his information in my presentation. He's focusing on water hemp, just like Dr. Peters. So I'm going to start with a little bit of work we're doing in canola. And question came up before about the use of glufosinate, and I can't remember exactly what that question was, but we definitely are relying on glufosinate a lot, especially in a couple of crops. And in canola, it's a great system. We got lots of crop competition, so we get that cultural aspect of weed control. Really helps us out a lot. Among the weeds that glufosinate struggles with, I would say lamb's quarters is one of them. I oftentimes have difficulty controlling it with glufosinate, and some of my early work in the greenhouse, we were working with quinoa. I thought, hey, maybe we could even register glufosinate for use on quinoa. And then next time we ran the same experiment, I turned the quinoa into brown sticks. So there are some nuances to using glufosinate effectively. And one of the things we've noticed is that we really benefit a lot from ammonium sulfate. We get that fertilizer component in there, and it benefits in modifying the spray solution as well as helping the herbicide get into the plant cells where it needs to be to control the weeds. So this research trial in particular, we're looking at a newer system. We've got this Spray Tech company, they've got this full tech system, and when I first started looking at it, it looked like you just need one component or the other. But I think in talking with the technicians, research reps on their side, they look at it as more of a combination system. We're trying to figure out the optimum combination of the full tech oil and full tech adjuvant. And they each have their components that, providing certain benefits. We're comparing, comparing glufosinate alone with adding with 1 pound of AMS or 3 pounds of AMS, and then combinations of, we've got full tech oil in here at 4 fluid ounces and full tech adjuvant at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So one of the attractive components of the system is the ultra low volume that they're proposing is providing sufficient activity. We add the pound of AMS, and control increases early on from 70 to almost 90%. Even glufosinate all by itself at 6 weeks after treatment, you can see we get very good activity on the lamb's quarters. And then with some additional crop competition, a month later, you got nearly 100% control. 3 pounds of AMS gets us a quicker start. So you notice the green bars here, the 2 weeks after, the nice stair step there. As we apply more ammonium sulfate in the solution, we get better activity. We get quicker kill, and then the crop can take over with canopy closure after that. The components of the full tech adjuvant does include a fertilizer type component, but as you can see, it's not early on as effective as AMS. Eventually, we get up to similar activity. It's the LSD of 3, so all of these bars up over here, they're all very consistent with the activity of even 1 pound of AMS along with the glufosinate. So overall, good system. It really, in some of the other work we've done also, it's very effective as a surfactant replacement. And we get a little bit less crop injury than some of the surfactants, and especially less than oil adjuvants. It oftentimes gives us a little bit better broadleaf weed control with an herbicide for broadleaf weed control than a surfactant. But in my work, I'm still seeing better activity when we use oil type adjuvants compared with the full text system. So we're continuing to work with that, work on that, make some improvements. Hopefully, common mallow, a little bit easier to control in this system. And you can see there we've got very stable, comparable control, regardless of whether we're using AMS or replacing it with the full tech system. Yeah. As far as liquid or dry AMS, I have not seen any differences. This actually, it says a pound of AMS, but we did use a liquid AMS source, but very comparable, similar comments across different generic type herbicides. Since I'm thinking about it right now, probably won't remember later on. I was going to include some information on Mountain versus Everest. So Mountain is a new trade name. It's a different formulation than Everest. Weed control is identical. One of the things that I really like about the Mountain is its handling. It's more of an EC. It's a thicker EC, and it goes into the tank, goes into suspends in the tank much more easily than the Everest formulations does. So AMS, doesn't matter whether you're liquid or dry, get it into the tank is definitely helpful. And the full tech adjuvant does not specifically have AMS. It's got other fertilizer type components into it. So that's why I think we see a little bit difference in the activity.
Hey Kirk, Liberty 280 or Liberty Ultra?
Liberty 280 or Liberty Ultra. This was Liberty 280. And I haven't had access to a lot of the Liberty Ultra in the work that we're doing. Do you think that there's much difference between the two?
That's why
Okay, so you're just wondering about differences. Liberty 280, Liberty Ultra, and I think I find more differences from one formulant company to the next compared with differences between 280 and Ultra. That dialing in on that Liberty Ultra has definitely been more difficult than we would all probably have thought, I think. So we do end up with situations where we've got weeds late in the season in the canola and trying to get those eliminated. We've worked on some different products over the last couple of years. This year we were able to add Reviton. Reviton's added to the weed guide for canola desiccation. We're looking at it more specifically here on the desiccation side of things rather than the weed control side of things. I think all of you will agree it is really difficult to kill those 4-foot tall weeds that come through the canola canopy late in the season. So try to do your best job to keep them out of the crop to begin with. So we're looking here at 4 different lines because we're tracking the progression of desiccation on canola. The green line is the check, and as one might imagine, that is going to track the lowest all the way along down here. Of course, we start, by the time we have canola that is physiologically mature, we're already at a pod desiccation range here. We've got about 65%, 50%, 60%, somewhere in that range. So we're trying to speed the end of that season and get things to dry out more quickly. So Sharpen and Reviton, very similar. And we're looking at 1.5 ounces each of these products. We also included the appropriate adjuvants with all these products. We got an MSO with the Reviton and the Sharpen. The Verdure is a diquat, so we got a non-ionic surfactant in with that. Definitely, it's hard to compare with that very rapid desiccation of the diquat Verdure product in this particular situation. The leaf tissue desiccates out even more quickly. We hardly need anything to help get the leaves to drop. The thing that we've been noticing in the last couple of years is that the stems are where we really start to see separation among the products. And again, as you can see on this figure, we get much quicker desiccation with that diquat type product, very rapid dehydration of the plant tissue. Sharpen, the yellow line, is responding well, but especially once we get past 4 days, then the Reviton is drying out that stem more similar to the diquat treatment, the verdure. So I think that's a really good benefit of that product, and getting those stems to dry out, gets them clipped off more easily, and they go through the combine more easily. I'm going to switch a little bit now. We're going to move into some work we're doing with kochia and sunflower. We're working with this, and Brian Jenks and Caleb Daly have also had a location on this, and you've heard already, you can probably hear later on again, we've got a PPO-resistant kochia problem, which is really messing with the pre-emergence treatments that we've been relying on from sulfentrazone products over the years. And this is a most recent map that I was able to get from Zach over at the Genotyping Center. All the counties in red have confirmed presence of the PPO resistance. If you are from a county that's in gray, that means that samples have been sent in, but they haven't been confirmed with the PPO trait. And people that live in counties that are white just need to step up and send in some samples. We have not received any samples from the counties in white. There's a couple of counties in there that I would expect you've got kochia problems. So help us out on tracking this. So we're looking at these pre-emergence type systems because in sunflower post-emergence, we really have no options for kochia control. We're looking at 15 to 20 gallons per acre spray volume. The application timing was pre-emergence, except for Zidua, because we wanted it to be on the ground a couple weeks earlier to try to hopefully take advantage of more precipitation, as that product needs more water for good availability. So you can see the products that we have there. We've got the herbicide rates and then the active ingredient amounts. Spartan, Prowl, Dual, and Zidua, we were applying those alone or in pairwise comparisons. So Spartan and Prowl, Prowl and Dual, Prowl and Zidua, all those other combinations. Those combinations are towards the right side on the bottom of the list here. And the first 4 bars are the individual products. So this 2 weeks after application, treatments were finished. You can see not a lot of great response there, ranging anywhere from 25 to about 50% control of the kochia. Also notice there that we've got 35 to 60 plants per square meter. And that population continued to increase from June to the middle of July, which is meaning that we have kochia now that is starting to germinate throughout the season. We used to think, get past May and you're kind of home free. But now we're seeing kochia biotypes with much later emergence patterns. So why is the control so poor here? I mean, Spartan, we were going to field areas where we knew we had PPO resistance. And in this location in particular, we did a spray strip to demonstrate that we had the PPO resistance, and then we sent in samples, and over 90% of the plants had the mutation for PPO resistance. So we were dealing with a difficult situation. And then to make that situation worse for the other products, this location only had about 1/4 inch of rain in the month after the treatments were applied. Now that is bare minimum for getting Spartan to work, let alone the other products. Prowl and Dual require a good 3/4 inch, I would say. And with the Zidua, I would really like to see more than an inch coming in 2 rain events of at least a half an inch each. So very, very poor moisture availability after the applications went on. Yeah.
Follow up on that. You might get those 2 rain events, but if it's not activated before those weeds emerge, it's not gonna get it.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Comment was that you might still get those rain events, but if the kochia has germinated and established, you're very unlikely to get what the industry calls that reach back. Once the kochia is there, half inch, definitely by the time you got an inch tall plant, these products are not going to kill them, those plants. And in this location, and I know at Brian's also, we had really good moisture before the applications went on, like a couple of inches of rain in the couple of weeks before we started putting things on. But once the herbicide goes on the surface, once the herbicide goes on the surface, you can have good moisture down here to get weed germination. That doesn't increase the availability of the herbicide that's on the soil surface. So we need to get a rain event to move it into the soil. And then with Zidua, we see the best control after it's in the soil. You need another rain event to make it available for the germinating weeds. So that's one of the reasons. I'll make the plug now. Reiterate, Caleb was looking at a lot of his work with Zidua in the fall. And I get Zidua in the fall for wild oat, but the next stage of this is we're putting the Zidua on in the fall and coming back with other products in the spring to try to layer the weed control program. All right. Turn this around. And this is one of the things that we identified. We were not getting additional weed control from these combinations. We're using full rates of each of the products. We tend to, in this research, we did not see increased control, but sometimes we saw a little bit a longer duration of control of the better product. So this is an image of our location. We definitely had lots of kochia we were dealing with, and you can see that the biomass was kind of thinned out more in the Prowl versus the Spartan, related to the resistance issue we have at this site. And of those plants, whether it was Prowl or Dual or even the Zidua, we saw a lot more instance where there's evidence at the bottom of this plant. You can see a lot of dead leaves. So we did have some activity on the plant, just not enough to kill it. When the plants recovered from Spartan, they grew uninhibited, essentially. When they were recovering and growing after the application of Prowl and Dual, we had suppression of the growth. And so there was still a little bit more weed control benefit, even though we're not eliminating plants. And you can see, there we go. Here we get to it. There's a little kochia plant over here, the middle of July, that's got 4 leaves on it, still emerging as we go through the season. Out in Hettinger, had a much better situation for moisture, if you can believe it. Take our driest location, Caleb, you might have a hard time getting some of these things to work. He got a couple of 2.5 inches of rain, I think it was, in the 2 to 3 weeks after his treatments all went on. So his treatments all look quite a bit better. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we've got the control, windrows of kochia in there. And in these other photos, you can see the sides of the plots and reducing the kochia biomass. So his control ratings were all up quite high. Notice especially the Zidua treatment here, very high level of control with those multiple rain events. Of the 3, Prowl, Dual, and Zidua, we would kind of expect Zidua to have a little bit better control based on previous data. But if you compare Zidua by itself to these combinations where we've got Zidua plus the other products, there is no improvement by having that other product there. We can round out weed control spectrums. We can perhaps, like I said, extend the activity, but we're not getting better control to wipe out that last 15% of kochia. Visible green foxtail control in Minot, because Minot didn't have any kochia. Just the way the things rolled off the line. But as my location was poor in moisture, Brian's was also very poor, about 1/4 of an inch in the several weeks. So Zidua at this location is not controlling the green foxtail. You get better activity out of the prowl and dual. This is one situation where individual products responded a little bit lower than combinations. We can get a slight improvement, an additive effect, not getting all the way to 99% control, but getting some of these treatments to be about 90% control. And in Hettinger, because of the additional rain, notice that the Zidua bar here is right up there with all the others, much better activity. Even Spartan getting 60% control on green foxtail, I think, is surprising. So we combine some of all this information, what are the best options? Best options definitely did not equal 100% control. So we are still trying to come up with systems that will give us better overall control. We got Spartan question mark here for kochia, because the answer there is really going to depend on whether you have PPO resistance or not. So be aware or get tested so that you know whether you can rely on the Spartan. And then the best 1 or 2 products varied depending on which weed we were talking about. So as we've said in the past, there is no one answer for everything, right? We need to manage the sites. We don't get necessarily better control when we do those tank mix components, but we get perhaps a little bit longer duration of control. Broadleaf weed control in wheat, taking off that kochia. So this figure has lots of different colors. You got kochia, cocklebur, ragweed, and lamb's quarters there in the different colors across the top. Looking at selection of herbicides, kind of focusing on those group 27 plus bromoxynil. We got in this slide 2 rates of Husky FX, which also has the fluroxapyr. We got Talinor, Bison as kind of an overall standard from over the years. Wider Match plus MCPA, all group 4 only, and then the Tolvera. The rates that come up before, and I realize, so here we've got low rates of Talinor and Tolvera. We've got medium and high rates of Husky FX. Husky FX also has the fluroxapyr. Can't show you every option all at once. This is a subset of larger data information. With the kochia control that was brought up before, early application is one of the best things we can do. These combinations of group 27 plus bromoxynil are very effective on a broad range of annual weeds. They really start to struggle on things like water hemp and kochia when the plants get to be 3 inches tall. Taller than 3 inches, and control really starts to decline. But as we've looked at combinations of treatment lists where we've got these 3 different products, they all respond very similarly. I haven't come across anything that really sets one out from another. We've got some differences in rotation interval that helps for sugar beet, but the application, attention to detail, and getting on smaller weed when possible definitely is one of the things that can help improve activity. So this is about 3 weeks after application. We go another 3 weeks after this. The wider match bars all reached up into the mid to upper 90s. The Bison, because of that MCPA not being great on kochia or struggles on some of the other weeds. The bromoxynil plus MCPA holds there at about 80% or maybe starts to decline. So like I say, we still put it in there because it is our historic standard, but it is not always the best herbicide. Looking at those same three products for water hemp, and this is some of the stuff that I was able to pull out of Ethan's thesis work. Again, the rates are there listed at the bottom. When we started his work, we talked with companies about where the label is going to be for rate and where do you going to market it for water hemp. And so we chose the rates, and then labels change and opinions change. So it is what it is. Overall, in the past couple of years, we've kind of identified the Tolvera as perhaps being a little bit better for water hemp. This year is a little bit more mixed in response, where we get really good activity here at Talinor, at Fargo location, similar to the Tolvera. Overall, the Tolvera still has been in the top group at all locations. Sometimes the Talinor drops off, sometimes the Husky drops off, but Tolvera has been a very reliable water hemp product, but not complete. And so then we were starting his project. We're looking at adding in that growth regulator. In the Husky FX, you got the fluroxapyr. A couple of years ago, I did some work across several growth regulators, and it didn't seem to really matter which one. As long as you had something else in the tank, it kept, though, that last 5% of control. Those plants that survived kept them from exploding. We got three different locations again. We're looking at Husky as the base product here, and then 2,4-D as an alternative at 8 ounces acid equivalent. Well, if we do this as a tank mix, Husky plus the 2,4-D, or as a sequential treatment, Husky followed by 2,4-D, is there any difference in control there? We're worried about potential antagonism by having it into the tank. Previously, we had seen some definite antagonism early on, but eventually the control optimized. And that's what he's been indicating, showing as well with his products, with 2,4-D or MCPA or even haloxafen. Just having it in there, it doesn't do any harm. It's going to round out your weed control spectrum and tends to keep those surviving plants from taking off and growing substantially. Gives you the flexibility of when you want, what you have in your tank. If you didn't catch it the first time, these treatments, the followed by treatments, are going on about 10 days later. We don't want the regrowth to get to be too large. We get it on the plant early enough so that it can keep it underneath the canopy. So moving over back to kochia relative to tank mixes, looking at Vios as a Vios FX as having that fluroxapyr component. Not enough fluroxapyr all by itself, definitely, in my opinion. But if we're going to tank mix that, what do we get not only for the kochia control, but what do we see on the foxtail activity? And foxtail information in red, kochia activity in the orange color. Our base treatment, Vios FX alone, you see we've got about 85, a little over 85% control of kochia and the foxtails that were present. If we add Husky, low rate of Husky to that, get the control of kochia up into the upper 90s. Over and over again, you probably notice that a lot of these, we're not completely controlling kochia or water hemp with any of these treatments. Doing the best we can with multiple products, full rates of 2 components, 3 components. We're just not getting that last 5 to 6% control. Tank mixing with bison gives us a nice increase in activity. We get several of these components are giving us all right around 90% control. Broad spec, we're here broad spec and MCPA, broad spec and 2,4-D. Doesn't optimize the kochia activity, but that thiophensulfuron tribenuron gives us that boost of foxtail control, which we've been seeing over the years. And comparing this to Tolvera all by itself at 11 fluid ounces, we're getting that 95% control on the kochia and about 97, 98% control on foxtails. So the Tolvera, and previous student was working with Tolvera more for the green foxtail, yellow foxtail activity, still seeing very substantial control out of the Tolvera product for foxtails. And in that student, Hayden Lee, when he was doing his work, he did a lot of screening on samples of foxtail that came in, characterizing group 1 and group 2 resistance, and then checking them for the Tolvera. And there, you might remember last year we talked about one location where we got some weird things happening. The plants bleached, but they never really died. Eventually they started kind of getting a little green color back in them. So we went to that location, that particular field site, with that questionable greenhouse response. This is the first time we've been in the field, and we set out this treatment list, having Tolvera at low and high rates. You got Axial Bold as a group 1, we got Everest as a group 2, we got combinations of about anything we could think of with those. We even have down towards the bottom Teammate, that's a peroxalam, and then Varo, thiocarbazole. Good news was that Tolvera, even at the low rate, 11 ounces, was still working exceptionally well in the field. We don't know still what was going on in the greenhouse, but in the field, the product is still working. We also noted that combinations of Tolvera with another group 1 or group 2 generally worked quite well, except we were getting antagonism from the Teammate or the Varo, which this isn't the first time we've seen this either. Especially for grass control, we put 2 products out, we oftentimes see the control at the lower end of the control. I see Joe is already standing in the back, man. So we do have the potential for antagonism. We see this antagonism in other situations. We got Axial versus Varo, and then combinations of the two, we get antagonism so that the control ends up being similar to the poorer level of control that's expected. And here we've, oops. We get a little boost of activity on the wild oat when we get the methylated seed oil in there, but it does not reach the level of pinoxidin by itself. So we do need to be cautious of some of the combinations we put together, or at least be aware of the expectations. This is really good as far as resistance management, but sometimes the alternative doesn't give us optimal levels of control. And then because we're always talking about Zidua, I'm still getting questions about the fall Zidua. This is just the most recent year of information. So we've got wild oat control with fall application of these products. Zidua at 2.5 ounces. I would generally expect about 65, so 70 falls right in line with what we've had over the years. Zidua at 3.25 got us up to 80 to 85 this last year. Zidua at 4 ounces, 90 to out to Valley City with the dry minimum till type situation, 95% control. Very substantial at the 4 ounces. We start trying to cut that rate back and you're going to lose wild oat control. Fargo at 40, so that's a little bit higher rate than we use in the spring. and getting that out in the fall. Part of it's degraded before we get to the spring. Avidex is a dry formulation. It's a granular formulation. So it takes a while for that herbicide to come off the granule and be available for degradation, which is one of the reasons why we get better control. The Fargo 40 and Avidex 12.5, it's actually the same amount of triolate, but we get better control with the Avidex because it is removed from the microbial degradation environment for a little bit longer in the fall. And then in the Fargo location, because we are in a cultivation area there, we incorporate that spring application has over the years been our best wild oat management for as a pre-emergence herbicide, getting up 95 to 99% control. So questions last minute, because I'm already maybe a minute or two over schedule. So a question over here. Question about the comment of late emerging kochia. I haven't really specifically heard other people talk about it that much in other regions. We're focusing on biology comments related to seed production and seed longevity, probably. But I know that Dr. Dexter, probably 20 years ago, was talking about how he's pretty certain that in sugar beet fields they had selected for a later emerging kochia biotype because they used to never have to worry about it after they did spring cultivation. And now, as you can hear, it's probably the second worst weed problem they have in sugar beet.
So, Kirk, you mentioned in sunflower, we match everything together, but for us in the eastern half of the state where we have moderate to high densities of water, moderate to high densities of kochia, and fruit one, fruit two resistant green foxtail for wheat, what's the right program? Is this qualifying with 2,4-D an option, and how important is it remaining seeds after harvest?
Well, let me focus on that managing the weeds after harvest, because all the other questions about what do we do in sunflower, we don't have a good toolkit for herbicides anymore, right? So it is going to get back more into the cultural and in areas where you have tillage, as you know, tillage to a certain extent. But managing the weeds after the previous crop's harvest is, in my opinion, huge. And for certain weeds, it's one of the best things we can do, because kochia plants have been documented to produce 15,000 seeds per plant after wheat harvest. That is more than enough to replenish the seed bank and increase your problem from one year to the next. And I don't know how much water hemp seed gets produced that late in the season, but we know that we've seen new emergence in late August even that will produce 50 to 100 seeds on a plant that's 3 inches tall. So making sure that that field does not just lay dormant for a month and a half after harvest is a really good management point to attack the weed spectrum.